Nobody's ever taught me anything about biodesign. I learned how to work with all the living systems on my own by researching things, trying these recipes on my own, watching lots of YouTube tutorials. Do not wait to have someone that teaches you or enrolling in an expensive educational program. You can do it on your own in your kitchen, and you can really start getting the feel and intuition towards working with living systems.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
It's going really well, Erum. Welcome to the Grow Everything podcast, where we're trying to keep it sane while crazy times happen all around us.
I know. I feel shock exhaustion. We talked about it, Karl, just that there's so many crazy things, so many fires, literally just every time I watch the news or turn on anything, something so bizarre is happening. And I feel like we've been saying that for the last 10 years. Maybe that's life, but it's still a lot to take in. You want to help. Sometimes your hands are tied. You can't do anything, but sometimes you can get up and say something. I heard that you were doing your part advocating for what's right.
Yeah, so we participated in the No Kings protest here in Brooklyn. There was 2 actually in Brooklyn and 1 in Manhattan. We participated in the protest that was happening at Grand Army Plaza. There was a good number of people, probably a few thousand people who came out in the rain because it was pouring rain. And it was a pretty mellow crowd, a little bit of an older crowd. Interesting always to do protest events in a big city, liberal New York City. Very different from what I think people expected, especially in Manhattan, where you take over the streets and people are like carrying lots of signs. But, it rained on our parade.
Yeah, I know. It's great that you went out. I know that there was a lot of events, and as we saw in the news, there was also the U.S. Army's 250-year anniversary parade, the military parade, Trump's birthday that was happening at the same time. So it was a lot to take in, but for the most part, things were peaceful. There were things that happened. This isn't a news podcast, but just stay vigilant, people. Just stay vigilant.
Yeah. And I will add for our Grow Everything listeners, it's not just political times that are crazy, but the amount of scientific information that has been thrown at us, discoveries, companies being founded, companies going under, all of this, it's just so much. Last week, Erum, you are a mentor at the Merck Digital Studios. The latest cohort graduated. Do you want to talk about that a little bit before we go on?
Oh, yeah. Just a shout out to my crew at the Merck Digital Sciences Studio. There are about 13 or so companies. These are companies that focus on accelerating drug discovery and developing therapeutics. And they're using software and AI. So it's really interesting to see how they're leveraging all the tools that we use to generate information for us, but in the world of biology. And yes, these companies focus on biopharma, but I'm telling them about what's going on in our other world here on Grow Everything. And they're like, oh, I could apply that to developing skincare line. I could use that to develop new materials. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. Because they're creating really fundamental technology. There's AI scientists. There's increasing protein expression, targeting certain biological pathways. So why not use that in a microbe to make some type of new biomolecule that could help with longevity, sustainable packaging? So that's cool. I mean, I love that we have this network of very intelligent people that are doers. They're starting biotech companies. That's insane. It's so hard.
Yeah.
But yet they're doing it. And you were there, you saw these people, you met these people, and it was in a very great, beautiful space.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, shout out to our friend Nick at Potato AI, who's been on the podcast and recently announced a very nice funding round for their AI scientist tool. Mm-hmm. And yeah, great event.
I will also say the investment that Nick received was from Tim Draper. Tim Draper owns a lot of Bitcoin. That's the fact.
Yeah. So, I mean, really good to see many of the investors that we see on a regular basis who are here based in New York City. People like Julie Wolf and her partner Sandra of 2048. Great to see our friend Sergey. Great to see Glennis of NYU Biolabs, who's been on the podcast. Great to see Hamdi, the guy who runs the thing. So just fun times and also very smart people. And that was on the biopharma side.
Yeah.
And just before that, we had talked about going to Suppliers Day, the New York Society of Cosmetic Chemists, where we did see a lot of biotech. And there's been some crazy news about longevity and personal care and beauty. Most recently, L'Oreal teamed up with Nvidia, of all people, and they're investing more in longevity, starting a Longevity Integrative Science Institute, which is just crazy. How does AI get applied to personal care and beauty? We're going to find out.
Yeah. L'Oreal's making the right step. They've had this Longevity Institute, and we talked to our friend Rocky Grazios about this when he was on the podcast representing Estee Lauder. But L'Oreal has been partnering with some really amazing companies looking to develop products in the xenotherapeutics space, Karl.
Wow, what is that?
Xenotherapeutics, like senolytic. So I believe that's getting rid of senescent cells.
Oh, wow.
So check that word out. And then rejuvenating aged mitochondria. A Swiss biotech company called Timeline is who's spearheading it, but L'Oreal revealed its collaboration with them. Rejuvenating aged mitochondria.
Holy cow. I mean, of course, we talk about these kinds of things, but the only places I ever hear people talking about mitochondria in this mainstream is in the fitness space. People talk about how do you increase the number of mitochondria. If you don't know what mitochondria are, those are the powerhouses of your cells. Mm-hmm. They produce all the energy in your cells.
Yeah.
So revitalizing them and getting rid of senescent cells is really interesting. I can't wait to see what they end up doing.
Oh, yeah. And then another cool collaboration. L'Oreal is collaborating with NanoNtech to create a product called Cell Bioprint. So that enables rapid under-the-skin analysis of longevity biomarkers in under 5 minutes.
Crazy. Yeah, I can't wait for this kind of stuff.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So here's another crazy piece of news. I know a lot of the people who listen to the podcast have different news sources, but the other piece of news that I just thought was so insane, but also didn't surprise me, was this Nucleus Genomics offering to optimize embryos for $5,000. And what they're doing is they're optimizing embryos for intelligence, comparing genetic sequences of embryos to genetic sequences, I guess, of really smart people for $5,000. And I think if you're a parent who's doing IVF, who wants to have really smart kids, $5,000 is not that much. We'll have to see whether this actually plays out and turns into something that is real. But what did you think about that, Erum?
Oh my, what? Wait, what did you just say? Hold on, I need to process that for 1 second. So basically, you're choosing smarter embryos, right? That's what
you're
it is.
Choosing smarter embryos.
What is the basis of intelligence?
Yeah.
You know? Is it doing math problems or having emotional empathy in order to collaborate with people and do good in the world? That's the question here. But maybe they thought of that. That's what we need to understand more, but we'll definitely keep an eye on this. Wow. Okay. I thought I came in hot with the L'Oreal and Nvidia and all of the things on that side, but you blew my mind.
All right, so we're going to reel it in a little bit. Last week, we featured Angela Belcher of the National Commission on Emerging Biotech. For those of you who happen to be in a big city, the National Commission on Emerging Biotech is doing a roadshow. And we'll leave the link in the show notes, but they are coming to New York City on July 22nd. I won't be here, but Erum, I'm sure you'll want to go to that.
Oh, yeah, I'll definitely be there. And then today's episode is going to be super interesting. So we're talking about some mind-blowing things when it comes to biology and tech. But what about biology and how it actually is? You know what I mean? Like, it's so weird. It's so bizarre. There's so many different understandings of biology throughout the ages. And there's different applications beyond just healthcare and environmental stewardship. There's also designing unique things like furniture. And we've had people on this podcast who think on the edge of biodesign. I mean, Dan Grushkin started the Biodesign Challenges, a great episode. John Cumbers is always just talking about what's on the fringe of biotech. But today we have Nancy Diniz.
I'm super excited to have Nancy on because Nancy is a pure biodesigner. In fact, she told us that she had started her career as a biodesigner at GenSpace, which we talk about a lot and where we've met. But she's an architect, an educator. She started a company called bioMATTERS, not to be confused with our friends at BioMatter, the protein design company. She's based in London, teaches design, has done a lot of biofabrication. You'll hear her talk about using digital fabrication tools and combining them with biological tools. And I think it's going to be a really great conversation. She's done some really fantastic things, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this conversation with our audience.
Amazing. All right, so let's just kick it off. Nancy Diniz, welcome to the Grow Everything podcast. We're so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much for the invite. Super excited to be here with you today.
Yes, we learned about you through one of our friends who's also a listener. His name's Yves Michel from the Yami Collective. And he was like, you have to have some more biodesign. You guys are just always talking about business and, like, let's just,
Biomanufacturing.
yeah, and that's all great and necessary, but let's get back into some creative element. And he's like, you need to get Nancy Diniz on. And I was like, okay, let's reach out. And here you are.
Oh, nice.
We're so glad that you're here. Your journey spans from architecture to computational design to biodesign, which is so fascinating. So this is why we needed you on this podcast. But we wanted to know, what was the catalyst that took you from designing buildings to designing with microorganisms?
Yeah, so moving into the biodesign field felt like really a natural extension of my architectural training. So the catalyst was when I started my teaching career, really, and postgraduate studies in computational design. So I came to London to the Bartlett Architecture School, and I studied computational design, virtual environments, and I was really experimenting with interactive and responsive systems using genetic algorithms, machine learning techniques, and I was constantly measuring the environment, visible phenomena like air pollution, light, human behavior. So a lot of sensors and cameras. So it was really about adapting data-driven approaches to design that could really respond dynamically to the environmental inputs. And at that time, something really felt incomplete. I mean, 1 decade later, with getting in touch with biomaterials in New York when I was teaching at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, something really felt incomplete. These systems really still dependent on a lot of electronic, synthetic components, extractive materials, and industrial processes. I started really to this engagement with living systems. At the time, I was working a lot with bacterial cellulose. I started thinking, why don't I just start thinking about biological systems as biosensors? That's the catalyst when I started working with living materials like mycelium, algae, bacteria, realizing that these microorganisms could just not be symbolic of life, but agents of design. This was the big shift in my practice. The big shift brought serious and deep considerations around aesthetics and ethics. Designing with life meant really was a big shift for me in terms of design thinking and making. But ultimately, it doesn't feel like I've cut the connection with architecture. It's just an expansion on architectural thinking.
Yeah, it gives us a picture in terms of what your journey looked like. And there's futurists who say biology is eating the world. I think it's a play on Mark Andreessen saying that software is eating the world. But since you're working at this intersection of biology and design, do you see this playing out in your work?
Definitely. I mean, biology is eating the world is this very provocative statement. Of course, technology has been pervasive in our world. Technology has really changed the way we live and work and communicate. So I really connect that with biodesign. I feel like this really is connected with the shift towards biodesign thinking in the way that there's a different way how we think about design. We're no longer bound into extractive passive materiality. Instead, we are really thinking about this living materiality. How can these systems can respond and grow? So these biological materials are not just more sustainable alternatives to conventional plastics and cement. They are also opening new design paradigms. For example, when you design with mycelium, it's not just shaping a material into a form, it's really shaping the conditions under the material growing. So this really reframes design as a co-creative process with non-human organisms. But finally, I think there is a big shift, a cultural and philosophical shift in terms of a deeper revaluation of these anthropocentric design approaches. Biology becomes more integrated into our tools, into our processes. So when we are thinking about, okay, we are really changing the paradigms of design in terms of we're not thinking about materials as inert entities. We are designing with life. It's not simply about designing around life or over it. It's really about raising profound philosophical questions about aesthetics or function, but it's also about raising ethical questions around agency and care. When you think about, okay, biology is eating the world, it's not just in the dystopian sense. It's really in the sense that it's more increasingly integrated in how we think, how we design, but also it's opening this new imagination around future sustainable design. But design for me is just not a discipline. It's a necessary shift in the worldview. So I see it like that.
Yeah, I really resonate with this concept of the shift. I feel it. I feel that there's a shift when it comes to using biology or working with biology, integrating with biology as a design tool. I hear you. I like this concept of biodesign thinking. So, design thinking has been used a lot in like innovation circles as a framework. But biodesign thinking, I mean, that's just such an incredible thought. And this is the world that you're living in. And I would love for us to think about one of your projects. I know you have several. So I wanted to start with the myco clay. So you talked a little bit about mycelium. Tell us a little bit more about that. What would someone see, touch, experience if they encountered your myco clay collection in person?
That's really nice that you mentioned this project. I think we are really proud of that project because we are very interested in developing these kinds of kinships in terms of ancient materials and new biotechnology framework. I would like to think that when people see our work, they will be invited to this tactile and visual dialogue between this very ancient material, like a clay material that's been used for thousands and thousands of years in human civilization and architecture, with this very speculative future of biotechnological innovation. In a way, for us, it's about opening questions to people and ultimately making people feel connected to both the earth, clay materials, to something that is biology, which is around us. So it's about bridging this ancestral knowledge with these ecological, futuristic possibilities through this material kind of storytelling. So this is what we feel like. And also there is something that we are very interested in. When you are growing mycelium, there is this really interesting gradation that happens between these two materials. And it's for us, it's like this new living bioglaze. Of course, when you think about glaze in ceramics, you think about this shiny and durable bioglaze. But for us, it's about what are the opportunities we are opening with this new biolayer in terms of materiality, in terms of craft. So these are the kinds of questions that we hope we can trigger through this microclay collection. Really, these are my thoughts when I think about how do I want people to perceive our work and to entice these new questions.
It's super interesting because when I look at the pictures of the ceramic objects, some of them look like traditional woven baskets, whereas other ones, they really remind me of these 3D printers that are used to print concrete houses. It's that kind of layering. But maybe you can describe a little bit what the process was to create these, because there's a big difference between the one that looks like it's a 3D printed house, but looks like a vase, and then the one that looks much more like a woven basket.
Yeah. Of course, we've been developing a lot of bespoke algorithms. So it's basically a lot of computational design. So there's a lot of manipulation in terms of the algorithms that we use. There is a lot of influence with biological forms. So there is a component of that that is very computational. I mean, we do a lot of algorithms, also AI involved, where we look at biological growth in nature, in natural systems. Lately, we've been with a commission that we recently completed for the Museum of Architecture in Slovenia. We were doing this residency for 6 months in Slovenia. So there's a big correlation between living systems context and then the local history of craft that we try to embed and articulate. So this matrix of variables that are very important in our work. The basketry, you just said, basketry techniques. I mean, my background is very international. I was born in South America. Then I was raised in Portugal, then coming to the UK, then going to Asia, then going to the US. So it's very international. A lot of these components feed into the work in terms of traditional crafts. So obviously there is amazing crafts in Native American pottery, ceramics, basketry in Portugal. There's a lot of different techniques that we look into, and then we try to really merge them. So there's a lot of influences. I mean, also we look at materiality from this anthropological perspective in terms of correlating artifacts with culture, with landscape, with climate, but also with communities. This is very influenced with the traveling that I do. We do a lot of interesting traveling in Mexico, but also South America. We've been going to Guatemala, all these different regions of the world that have amazing traditional crafts. Recently, we did this symposium and exhibition. It's called Ancient Futures, that we've done an exhibition in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and we are bringing that now to London. And so we've been interfacing these amazing artists and artisans from all over the world that we deeply respect. And biodesign is very interested in this idea of crafting resilience, this idea of looking into this amazing knowledge coming out of these communities. You mentioned all these different patterns that we try to develop. There is a lot of interest in our side. I mean, of course, I don't know if we've been successful on achieving this, but really investigating this embedded traditional ecological knowledge, which is an expression that is about seeing material artifacts not as objects, but as systems of living and making and maintaining these relationships with communities and more than human worlds. So it's really about all this ambition, goals. It's not just about our work, it's about our research and about our writings and publications. So it's really about this idea of place-based design, craft being inseparable from geography and culture and ancestry, and materials often being hyper-local and renewable, and waste being minimized, practices that often operate in this closed lab system. So it's really taking a lot of these learnings for our practice and adapting that to our ethos and the way we think about materiality in general. I don't know if I'm talking too much about
No, I could listen to you for hours. The way that you converge all these different vectors of time, so ancient, different materials, different geographies, it's incredible. Yes, you need a computation power to even help make sense or help you get to all these different data points. I'm really curious about that, but I really want to hit on this idea of living entities working with biology. And I know that living entities are unpredictable. You've said that it's both interesting and daunting. It could have a high failure rate. So could you share a spectacular failure that ultimately led to an important breakthrough?
I love that question.
Yes.
First of all, I would just like to say I have all these ideas that I'm talking about, but this is really the confliction of myself as an educator, as a practitioner. Of course, I teach all these things to my students, and all these things start to become very interconnected. But first of all, I would just like to say something I tell to my students all the time, that I feel like often the most significant breakthroughs emerge through failure and not in spite of it. So it's always guided by this idea of trial and error. But certainly with our practice, working with living systems like Mycelium often feels like navigating this delicate and unpredictable negotiation. And contamination in particular has been one of our most persistent challenges. We've had entire batches of mycelium-based materials that fail after weeks of preparation, not only to be undertaken by unwanted molds or bacteria just before completion. I mean, these failures were immensely frustrating, both financially and emotionally taxing for us, especially when you are on tight timelines, when you're trying to meet expectations from external partners. So this has been really failures that have taught us a lot. And this has been a critical shift in our practice. It was really about reframing failure as part of the biological dialogue. Living organisms that do not behave like inert materials. They react to microenvironments. They are very delicate to environmental change, handling, contamination, and even shipping. It's really complicated to work with this. So it's been a learning curve for us to reduce risk and cost, which led us to more resilient protocols and new design languages to embrace this modularity, adaptability. I mean, visible signs of microbial variation. We embrace this as part of the aesthetic language, for example. So all these challenges and failures has been really important for us to tailor our practice, to transform the thing we make, and how do we overcome all these challenges. So it's been part of the process. And yeah, it's been a constant recalibration of everything all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but big failure. What's a big one?
Big failure is really contamination for us. It's a big problem. I mean, they just get all moldy, and yeah, that's really difficult. So that's the biggest problem we had. But wow, we had a lot of really interesting failures and accidents that led into really beautiful work as well, in terms of texture, in terms of growth time, and calibrating the growth. Can we really change the aesthetics of a piece, for example? So we've tried many different things in terms around temperature, length of growth, the time that you dry the pieces. So that creates a lot of variation in the work that we think it's very beautiful in terms of the final results.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
It's super interesting because we just came back from Symbi beta. And I mean, we've had some biodesign, a lot of biomanufacturing, a lot of materials here on Grow Everything. But one of the things that seems to be emerging, or maybe it's still nascent, is this idea of being able to manufacture with multiple organisms at once, which is like what you're talking about when it comes to mycelium and this contamination issue. Then thinking, if you're going to manufacture on an industrial scale or even on a small scale, that you have to realize that biology doesn't work in a vacuum. Like working in biology in steel tanks, we do it, but it presents a lot of challenges. You're working with these unpredictable living entities. You say it's interesting and daunting, but how do you navigate this tension between being a designer who is very used to controlling outcomes, even if it's on a screen, and then being this facilitator, docent for living systems that have their own ideas?
Yeah, I think it's been, again, a process of adapting to this process. Of course, this approach offers an exciting new perspective on what it means to create, what it means to be a creator, and where design is an ongoing dialogue between human intention, biological growth, and in our case, very much guided by the digital and machinic precision. So for us, this is a really fascinating process. I mean, we talk about our methods being this biodigital craft. And there's a lot of designers that are doing these kinds of things, embedding robotic fabrication, 3D printing. So unlike these traditional materials, this process must be maybe ongoing and many iterative and requires continuous evaluation of the living system's response to the conditions. This goes back to this idea of developing these kinships between craftspeople and living organisms and this whole thing about ethics of care. And for me, I get really fascinated by the connection with the living system, whether it's a bacteria or whether it's algae or whether it's mycelium. I just really love, it's almost like gardening in a way. I don't know, but I really like the connection with the living thing, with the living organism. And I really established this very intimate relationship with this entity. So there are a lot of bioethical issues that I have no answers to. And we constantly question all these ethics of care. What does it mean? Because in a way, we exterminate their life sometimes, we keep it alive other times. So this manipulation of the living organisms, it just creates a lot of tension and a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have a lot of questions about, for example, mycelium. What happens to mycelium while it's growing? What happens with mycelium while it dries? What happens when the mycelium does not require further human intervention in the process? So I wish I could one day write a whole book around all these implications of this manipulation with living systems and this integration in terms of design processes. I mean, going back to the initial question, maybe I'm going on a tangent, but what does it mean me as a designer as no longer the orchestrator of the whole process, but it's more like this collaborator? I just think it's an amazing process. I'm totally in love with it. I just think you need to get into this new path of thinking and making. It's not for everyone, I think, maybe, but something that I truly believe and I'm fascinated by. Of course, I have to be because I teach biodesign as well. So these two worlds are very interconnected way I think about design.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely interconnected. I love the concept of a garden when you're thinking of like, okay, you have to grow something, but it's not sterile. You just plant a seed and it grows, and then you can't control what the actual plant will look like. You have some semblance because you have these seeds and you have a vision in your head. But all you got to do is just drop it in, put some water, and let the sun do its job. And of course, the soil microbiome that's also working there. I see that form of design, the seed, but then obviously the microbes, that's a completely different world and you can't control it. You have to, like you said, collaborate. And something Karl said I thought was really interesting. It's this idea of contamination. Like, what does that mean? And I know that if you're looking for a certain outcome, contamination is not a good thing, but how do you embrace the contamination? How can you work with the contamination? I think is like another concept. And I'm saying this as someone who does not ferment anything. So I'm just talking out of thin air, but I'd love to come to this term that you use in your work. And I think this is going to help really ground us. This term symbicene. And it's a proposed new geological epoch emphasizing symbiotic relationships between humans and nature. So how is your work at BioMATTERS, which I'd love to know more about, how is it helping to manifest this vision of the symbicene?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see it as a kind of a foundational ethos for us. This approach that it actively informs both our design processes and our material choices. This term really describes this new, like you were just explaining, this new geological epoch in which humans and non-human life forms exist in this mutual beneficial relationship, as opposed to extractive and hierarchical dynamics of the Anthropocenic design process. So it's not really an utopia. It's a design challenge. That's how we see it at BioMATTERS. We see it as a design challenge. We see it as our role to help shape the future by creating these systems, aesthetics, and artifacts that make living in balance with nature not only viable, this romantic idea that many people talk about, but it's this new enticing goal for us. So our work really thrives to materialize this shift by rethinking not just what we design, but how we design with living organisms, with biological systems. Rather than treating biology as a passive resource to be exploited, it's about us engaging with it as an active collaborator. So, for example, in our projects involving algae and Mycelium, we explore how these organisms can author the material aesthetics. So it's really about harnessing this biological agency where we are co-evolving form and function in response to these environmental, biological, and cultural cues that have been really derived by this environmental crisis. This is the spirit of symbiosis, and the symbiocene is the foundational ethos, but it's about what we call relational design, this equilibrium of forces that is for us what symbiocene means.
And along those lines, you have this experience of going from Petri dishes to architectural elements, for example, in your bioreceptive clay brick columns. And we'll leave some links in the show notes so that people can actually see what this looks like. But what do you see the biggest challenges are when you translate biodesign from small objects into building scale, city scale applications?
Yes, so this is a really important question that often comes up in all conversations to do with biodesign, biotech. How do you start scaling up biofabrication?
Yes.
Which it's a very good question. It's a very important question. So I think upscaling nature integrated strategies concept is technically feasible, but it does require investment in terms of biofabrication infrastructure. So think about machinery, think about upscaling bioreactors, modular fermentation systems. So this obviously needs strategic investment in cross-disciplinary collaboration across engineering, biology, design, but also in policy. Rather than an immediately large-scale transformation, you need to implement this modular and adaptive approach to design, testing, and refinement. So to ensure this long-term success, we need to really emphasize again the need to recognize, it's a philosophical shift in terms of how do we see manufacturing, but also recognize biomaterials as this dynamic and evolving agent rather than static materials. So there is a lot to do in terms of fostering public engagement, fostering investors to adapt this and policy, to adapt these regulatory frameworks and integrate this biofabrication, robotic fabrication, which I think it is important when you think about upscaling. I totally think that adaptive manufacturing, robotic fabrication plays a very important role to enhance efficiency and scalability.
Wow. I love the idea of adaptive manufacturing, just to be able to have the feedback loop to help with the guiding. And so if the biology is manifesting in a certain way, how do you quickly turn things around? I would love to see this in practice. This would just be so great. Maybe in the next episode, we can bring cameras to wherever you're doing this so we can see it work in action. I love seeing manufacturing. I think it's very calming.
You guys to visit our studio and see our work.
Yes, yeah. That'd be great.
When you're here in New York, definitely. And then we're talking about maybe being in London in September for the BioFair. So that could be part of it too.
Nice.
It's just so fascinating. So we talked about scale and how to think about that from a biodesign thinking perspective, which again, I love that concept. And again, you earlier mentioned looking at ancient history, looking at global work, global efforts, global craft. And you've integrated indigenous knowledge and traditional materials with cutting edge technology. That's just how you roll. So, can you talk about a specific instance where ancient wisdom informed your high tech approach?
Yeah, we had the project in Slovenia, and this was a good example. It was a commission for the Museum of Architecture in Slovenia. And we're really looking for historical connections to biomaterial practices. And during our research, we went to several museums. We found this specific mushroom, which is called tinted conch. The technical name is Fums fomentarius, if I'm not mistaken. But this mushroom is used to create textiles and hats and garments in East Europe as well, in Romania, in some parts of Romania. So for us, it was a good example of people that had been intuitively working with living materials for centuries, long before we talk about scientific understanding of biological systems in terms of applying it to design today. For us, these examples really serve as a powerful reference point in terms of our project, reinforcing this idea that materials should be collaborative and adaptive and evolving rather than static and inert. So this was a good example. I mean, just a recent example of discovery that we made of this textile made of mushrooms. People talk a lot about mycelium made leather. There's a lot of companies doing that, but we tend to forget that people have been doing this for centuries in other cultures. So that was a recent example. We were really interested in going and seeing this. And in the museum, they were actually showing this hat made out of this mushroom. We investigated these practices where they literally grow these gigantic mushrooms and then they hammer it to very thin layer to create this leather, mycelium leather. So this was one of them.
That's amazing. I wonder how many of the people who are working on these mycelium materials actually know that this exists already in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I think they might know, the ones that are really now growing.
Yeah.
The ones that are growing now, MycoWorks, my good friend Phil Ross, and other ones that are growing. I'm sure Phil Ross knows. He must know.
Yeah.
How gigantic is a gigantic mushroom?
It's really huge. I would say at least 0.5 meter radius.
Wow.
Like 4 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, I started looking at pictures of this stuff. It's pretty crazy. We'll also have to drop a link in the notes. So thinking ahead for the next decade or so, what are the emerging technologies or scientific discoveries that you think will really transform the field of biodesign?
Yeah, there's a few things that I think will be usually influential for me. Definitely synthetic biology and bioprogramming. It's the most game-changing, particularly the ability to design and program cells with the same precision, imagine, as we know, associated with software. So tools like CRISP, DNA, origami, and cell-free systems, they will become more accessible to designers more and more. So designers will have this accessibility to create organisms that are tailored to produce specific materials. For example, bacteria that is changing color to black, for example, or other specific materials that respond to environmental stimuli or carry these ecological services such as carbon capture, bioremediation. So I think synthetic biology definitely will dramatically change in terms of biodesign. I mean, this is more about infrastructure that I was talking about earlier. We will see a rapid development in terms of bioreactors, desktop bioreactors, fermentation systems, robotic fabrication tools. These technologies will really allow designers and small scale labs to grow living materials. So more and more, there's going to be this evolution in terms of hybrid fabrication environments where digital manufacturing meets living growth, and we will refine how these living materials are going to be produced. And it's really about decentralizing and open source biomanufacturing with the creation of open source biology, community biolabs. I think DIY biodesign will democratize access to tools and knowledge, which is something that is a problem now. People don't have access to labs. So this will decentralize innovation and open up biodesign to a more diverse audience and practitioners. So we'll see new forms of more localized regenerative production centers rooted in this place-making knowledge. Another thing that I think will be huge will be AI and machine learning in living systems design. I think artificial intelligence and machine learning will play a critical role in terms of modeling complex biological behaviors, optimizing these biofabrication processes. So I think these tools will help us predict growth patterns, simulate cellular behaviors, and co-design material systems. And of course, I really think that integrating AI into lab environments will accelerate experimentation and make biodesign more efficient and scalable and precise. I think these four kind of things that I think will change and will help biodesign scale up.
Yes, hell yeah. That's what I'm talking about. I think we have to make that the summary of the Grow Everything podcast. I mean, everything you said hit on those points, and what a beautiful vision of the future, or not even future. All these little bits and pieces are there. We just need to put them together. So now I'm going to put this question to you. So if resources and technical limitations weren't an issue, what would be your dream biodesign project?
Yeah, I think obviously everybody wants to scale up biodesign and everybody on this same race. I think we are all racing towards scaling up to the architectural scale.
Yeah. Yeah. But what would you want to make if there's no issue? Everything was open source. You had really cool bioreactors that were helping guide the biology. What would you make for the world or for yourself? I mean, anything, but what's the thing that you would make?
Yeah, I don't want to dream too big. I would just do this house, my house. That's my dream project, this living house.
Oh,
yeah, that's what I would really like to do. I mean, it sounds very sci-fi, but I imagine being full of bioreactors producing my food, these closed loop systems where the waste is completely, which by the way, has been since the 60s, all the designers and architects have been thinking about the same thing. And this is why I'm fascinated, because I think as architects been idealizing these systems for a very, very long time. I think biodesign started realizing that. Biotechnology was very utopian in the 60s. Many architects have been designing these closed systems where waste is completely reintegrated. Everything is super efficient. But I think that's for me the most exciting thing is that now with labs and this very tangible interaction with living system, we can see this really happening. So that would be my dream. I would just do my house with complete integration with biological systems, keeping them alive, bioremediating my waste, cleaning my air, everything bio-based. I would grow my food, future food systems, which is, biodesign is very broad in terms of topics and range of topics. So it encompasses everything.
Yeah. I'm picturing one of these New Mexico Earthships, but biological Earthship.
Yeah, this is my partner's dream. He's from New Mexico and really wants to do everything with his bare hands. He wants to print his own Adobe house and he just wants to make everything from scratch. So this is the dream. This is our dream. We're just going to bio ranch in New Mexico.
I love that.
Yeah, I love it. You need to talk to Ellen Jorgensen because we've talked about doing this in Alaska. And this idea of having a fully biological community, I think, is well within reach the next decade. So as we close out, Nancy, what advice would you give to young designers who want to work at this intersection of biology, technology, design, and don't really know where to get started? What do you recommend?
So yeah, that's a really good question because it's something that I talk about all the time with my students in open days. I try, and people ask me that all the time. So I really think there is this fear of science. People are very intimidated by science and labs and all these things. I always tell them I learned everything from scratch myself. Nobody's ever taught me anything about biodesign. I learned how to work with all the living systems on my own by researching things, getting in touch with mycologists, trying these recipes on my own, watching lots of YouTube tutorials. So I really think it's about just get your hands dirty and start making. Don't wait to have someone that teaches you or enrolling in an expensive educational program. You can do it on your own in your kitchen and you can really start getting the basics and getting the feel and intuition towards working with living systems. And that's what I recommend. That's why I like these spaces like Gen Space in Brooklyn. That's how I started. I started there. This is how I started teaching and learning. And now I'm the course leader of biodesign. But I always tell everyone, just get going. There's a lot of information online, lots of resources for free. And you don't need to spend a lot of money. You can just start doing these experiments. Go and collect living systems in the park, grow them at home, follow these basic protocols, and you start getting this feel and this passion. That's my advice.
I think that's amazing. That's a fantastic way to end this episode. Thank you so much, Nancy, for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. It's really nice. It's nice meeting you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to share this episode with the world.
Yeah, me too.
Erum, what did you think of that podcast?
That was so deep. She touched on disciplines that we don't talk about as much: anthropology, how do ancient civilizations influence our understanding of biology, and how much information we probably lost. We haven't really talked about that, but she brought it to us. She's a designer. She's looking at art. She's looking at emotion. She's looking at culture. And it was good to hear about her projects. What about you? What was your thought about the episode?
I mean, there's so much. I think one of the things that we tend to forget is how important creativity is. Mm-hmm. And we're in one of these times in history where I think creativity is more important than ever. Mm-hmm. And Nancy really embodies that. The fact that she's using biomaterials, coming up with new ways to biofabricate things, the fact that she's got the environmental and ecological crisis or climate crisis front and center. I was really fascinated by this idea of ancient futures, a project that she mentioned she had done in Kazakhstan, which is one of those places that I think about, but I'm not sure many people think about in Central Asia. It's a vast, huge country, very interesting, very wealthy. I'd like to know what else they're doing in either biotech or biodesign. And then Nancy has that attitude that a designer has, like you need to fail a lot to succeed. Your biggest failures can turn into your biggest successes. And applying what she does, you mentioned design thinking, to bigger problems and showing them publicly forces people to think differently, which I think is really important.
Yeah, thinking differently is extremely important. And I'm also curious to learn more about what her students are working on, because she's such an inspirational person and she's giving these students more option space to think about what they can do when it comes to biology design and their purpose, not purpose in life, but what they want to do. What's their output to the world? So that's something we need to keep an eye on as well, just who's coming out of Nancy Diniz's world. Those are the people that are going to continue growing everything.
Yeah. I mean, you and I have both been to the Biodesign Challenge events that they have every year, and just seeing the amount of creativity that comes out of the design schools when designers are given the tools of biology or even presenting the tools of biology is just amazing. I've given lectures and hosted classes at the Pratt Institute here in Brooklyn. Same kind of thing. The people who blow me away and the people who are in many ways the most challenging to work with are the students, because they want to take these humongous leaps, which are not easy to do, but they should. And I think that someone who's been in it like me for a long time should just take inspiration from them and not let them be the ones holding us back. But Nancy was fantastic. I think she said some really nice things that we should be cutting up and using to tell more people about the Grow Everything podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And more thinkers like Nancy. She definitely gave off a bit of Neri Oxman vibes in terms of the unique approach to biology and philosophy. We need more biodesign thinkers on the podcast, and we'll do that. We'll do that for you guys.
As Erum mentioned, go back and listen to some of our other episodes on biodesign. Those are the episodes with Suzanne Lee, Elizabeth Hennef, Dan Grushkin, the John Cumbers episodes. Those all have an element of biodesign, and that's really, something that we love and want to feature a lot more here on the Grow Everything podcast.
Yep. Stay tuned for next episodes. We have some incredible guests, as you can imagine, we would say. And we love hearing from you guys, so give us a shout out. Our information's in the show notes. You can email us. You can text us. We do have a phone number. And of course, we're on social media. But thanks for listening. And that's the pod, right, Karl?
That's the pod. Thank you.